Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining us for this online message this weekend at Deep Rivers Church. If you're out of town because it's a holiday, hope you're having a great time, and we'll see you again real soon. And as always, if you're not feeling well, there's usually somebody not feeling well, hope you bounce back real quick. Wednesday night is our prayer house, our Thanksgiving Eve prayer house. It's a Thanksgiving Eve service, but it's just pretty much a souped up prayer house. So come join us Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. All right. We have been walking our way through Philippians, and this weekend we're going to touch on Philippians chapter 3. This is sort of a survey of Philippians. We found out you could do a much deeper dive in Philippians. You could spend 6 months on Philippians. Anyways, so what I want to do, instead of reading the entire chapter to you, I'm just going to kind of hit on some of the phrases. Some of these are going to be well familiar with you, and then we'll kind of unpack them as we go. So he starts off with Philippians chapter 3 by saying, rejoice in the Lord. Now he's making the point that we need to rejoice in God, not our circumstances, not our situation. It's Thanksgiving, right? And we're getting together on Thursday with family and friends to be thankful for what? Basically our circumstances, whether it's provision, our country, whatever it is that people are getting together to be thankful for. It's basically boils down to our circumstances and our situations. But Christians are different. We want to rejoice in the Lord, but it's not dependent on tangible physical things, all right? It's who God is. We can rejoice in the Lord because we believe that God works all things together for our good. Now that's Romans 8. Now the kicker is, how do you define good? God defines good differently. He defines good as something that builds our character, something that glorifies Him, okay? So we need to recognize that. Joy is fitting. It shows we really do trust in a God in whom we really believe is in control. Again, working all things together for good. When we believe this, it isn't any surprise that we are then filled with joy. So if you want to rejoice, be filled with joy, you have to recognize that God is in control of all things. Now, I came across this paragraph, and this is going to be kind of challenging. It is the duty for us as believers to cultivate this joy. We must steadfastly arrest any tendency to murmur and complain or to find fault with God's dealings. We must resist the temptation to depression and melancholy as much as we would any form of sin. So there's going to be hard seasons. There's going to be hard times. You're going to have a bad day, bad week, bad month. But for the most part, on a macro level, you step back and look at our lives in a general, we should be a people of joy. Again, there's going to be hard things, and we're not going to bounce around in joy all the time. But we need to cultivate it in our lives. Paul went on to say this, watch out for those dogs. Now, who is he calling dogs? He's not calling non-believers dogs. He's calling religious people dogs. The same way that Jesus was kind of the shortest fuse and the meanest to the religious leaders, Paul's kind of fallen into the same thing. He says, watch out for those dogs. It's a harsh reference to the troublemaking legalists who are attempting to deceive the Philippians. Dogs is exactly the term of contempt that Jews would use against Gentiles. Whew. So now that same insult that they could give towards Gentiles is being turned back to them. Why this application of this image? The herds of dogs which prowled about their cities. We think of dogs as warm and fuzzy and cuddly. We have a very warm idea of a dog. But for them, think about dogs in the first century. The herds of dogs which prowled about their cities without a home and without an owner, fed on the refuse and filth of the streets, fighting among themselves and attacking passers-by. Negative. So Paul is being intentional when he accuses these people of being dogs. Now, who are the dogs? They are the people who are trying to convince the Philippians that they need to add things to the cross. Now, in this situation, it was circumcision, that they still needed to be circumcised. They were saying you still have to do some of these Old Testament things. Yeah, Jesus is great. In fact, they didn't deny that Jesus was the Messiah. So they're not altogether bad people. They're not wrong. or that his gospel was the power of salvation, but they insisted that Gentile converts could only come to the fullness of the gospel through the law of Moses or works. And Paul doesn't like that at all. He calls them dogs. He did not see circumcision or works as anything beautiful or noble, but an ugly example of mutilation. That's why he's so strong about this. And then he goes on to say, we are the circumcision. Paul declared that he and his followers were the true circumcision. They worship God in spirit as opposed to the fleshly external worship stressed by the legalists. So the legalists are saying, hey, you got to do these outward signs if you want to be right with God, totally right with God. In fact, this word worship, it really kind of means service to God by his people. A Jewish person hearing Paul say this would be scandalized by this application to a Gentile. To think that Gentiles could worship God, that was a foreign thought for them. So, their joy was not found in their own ability to be justified by the law. So Paul, who's saying we are the true circumcision, their joy is not going to be found in their own ability to be justified by the law or by keeping their law keeping. All right, Jesus and Jesus alone is their source of joy. Paul went on to say this, we put no confidence in the flesh. They do not trust in their own ability to be righteous before God through, again, these external works of the flesh. Their only confidence is in Jesus. Their confidence was not in themselves. The whole Old Testament really is there to show us of our inability to live by the law. That's what, the Old Testament does a lot of things. It provides the fulfillment of prophecy and a lot. But a lot of the Old Testament law is just to show us our own inability. So Paul is remembering that. He says, I don't have the ability to do this. He's putting his ability only in Jesus. Then he goes on, if someone else thinks they have reasons to put confidence in the flesh, I have more. So Paul's saying if there's anybody out there who can make a stronger claim that they are going to be righteous by the works of the law, Paul says no one can compare to me, basically. It's a pretty brash, bold thing to say. Paul knew that he was more qualified to be justified by keeping the law than any of his opponents were. Then he lists 3 reasons why he should have confidence in the flesh more than anybody else. He was circumcised on the 8th day. He's from the stock of Israel. He's from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He is an heir to God's covenant. He's from, not only that, he can add to that, he's from the tribe of Benjamin, which was a distinguished tribe. The first king came from the tribe of Benjamin. It aligned with faithful Judah when Israel split, and Jerusalem was actually found in the territory of Benjamin. And then he goes on and lists 3 things that were his choice, his conviction. Again, more reasons to have confidence in the flesh. If anybody should be at the top of the list, it would be Paul. He says, I was a Pharisee. They were the elite sect known for their meticulous devotion to the law. Okay? Never more than 6,000 Pharisees. They were like, if you think, the spiritual athletes of Judaism. They were referred to as the separated ones. They separated themselves from all common life and common tasks so they could keep every smallest detail of the law. So he was a Pharisee. They're all about. They wake up in the morning 24/7. All they want to do is keep the law. But not only that, he had zeal. He was, as a Pharisee, persecuting the church. He wasn't just an intellectual opponent of the so-called heresies of Jesus. He was an active fighter against them. And then he considered himself blameless or faultless, achieved a standard of righteousness, which was accepted among those in his day. Obviously, this standard fell short of God's, but because of how the law was interpreted and taught, there were those Pharisees who were deceived into thinking they really were blameless. You see this a little bit in Luke 18 with the rich young ruler. Okay, so these Pharisees thought so much of themselves they could consider themselves faultless or blameless. In summary, if anyone could lay claim to pleasing God by keeping the law or the works of the flesh, it was going to be Paul. He was more qualified than his legalistic opponents were to make such a claim. But instead, he says, whatever were gains to me, I now consider loss. All these things, the three reasons, all these things I just mentioned, all right? He considered them all a loss. How about this little paragraph? After 20 or more years of experience, Paul had an opportunity to review the so-called balance sheet of his life, looking at his assessment and seeing whether or not his reckoning was correct. What was the result of this evaluation? How did matters stand in his last reassessment? He exclaims with a special emphasis, yes, I count all things but loss compared to knowing Christ. But then he goes on to say this. Not only consider loss, I consider them garbage. Now, dogs is a strong word. Garbage is a strong word. Very strong language. Literally, in the language, it means two things. Excrement, dung, if you will, which is not just worthless, but offensive. I mean, there's one thing to have something that's worthless. It's another thing for it to be offensive. This Greek word actually had two uses, like I said, excrement, dung, or table scraps that were only fit to be thrown out to the dogs. So we may assume that Paul would be comfortable with either meaning. It's either excrement, dung, or it's just table scraps that are only good for the dog. Now, I grew up in the church, went to Bible studies my whole life, and I think I probably had a faulty understanding of this, and whether a good-hearted youth leader or youth pastor, I don't know where I got this impression. But when I heard this phrase, I consider them garbage, in my brain I thought of the things of this world. You know, all the things that things of this world offer are garbage compared to knowing Christ. But that's not what the text is saying. What's garbage? What's garbage is all the things that Paul was trying to do when he was a Pharisee. His old way of pleasing God. That's garbage. The garbage isn't worldly things. The garbage is religious things. Behaviors that please God. Again, in my faulty understanding of this, there's 180 degrees wrong. The word shows how utterly insignificant Paul saw everything, even the good things that he did, compared to the gospel. He goes on to say he has a righteousness that comes from God on the basis of faith, not what he does, but what Christ has done. He exposes the big difference of a legal relationship, which the legalists are pounding about, and his personal connection with Jesus. The difference is between living and trusting in your own righteousness, your own works, your own effort, or living and trusting in God's righteousness, given freely through faith in Christ. You could say this: Paul disowns his own righteousness as eagerly as others disown their sins. Instead, he prizes the righteousness of Christ has produced for us, which again becomes ours only by faith. And he goes on to say this: I want to know Christ. It's a simple plea from Paul's heart, one unknown to the legalist, who must always focus on their performance of some kind to find peace with God. But Paul wanted Jesus, not himself. To know Jesus is not the same as knowing about him. It's not the same as knowing right doctrine. It's not knowing what his moral example or expectations are. It's not the same of knowing as knowing his great work on our behalf. When we know someone because we recognize them. We distinguish what is different when compared to others. When we know someone, it's because we are acquainted with what they do. When we know someone, we converse with them. We are on speaking terms with them. When we know someone, it's because we spend time in their house and with their family. When we know someone, it's because we've committed our life to them, in this case with Jesus, and to live with them every day, like in a marriage or with our family members. It's interesting, when you are married, you know that person because you spend time with them. You don't know about them, you know that person. It's interesting that marriage is kind of an example because the church is also referred to as the bride of Christ, which is can't not go, has to be mentioned, can't go unsaid. He goes on to say this, to know the power of his resurrection. Now, this is an interesting phrase, the power of his resurrection. Now, it seems you could say this is not the power displayed in the resurrection, but the power that comes out of the resurrection. I think sometimes when we hear the power of the resurrection, we think, oh, that same power that raised Jesus. I think it might be a little bit different. It's the power that comes out of it. It's not just God's power that raised Jesus. It's the power that comes from it. Same power, but different source, if you will. The power of the resurrection is an evidencing power. It's the proof, it's a seal that everything Jesus did and said was true. So we see a power in the resurrection. It's evidence. It's a justifying power. It's a receipt or a proof again that the sacrifice of the cross was accepted as payment in full. The power of the resurrection is a life-giving power. Amen. Those connected with Jesus can receive the same resurrection life that we live in Christ's power, not our own. It's a consoling and comforting power. It promises our loved ones who are already with Christ will be with him and will live with him. And then Paul goes on to say this, not that I have already obtained all this. Paul wrote from such a spiritual maturity and purity that we might think he conquered all of his spiritual difficulties. Yet he assures us there is no perfect Paul. Well, what does this apply to us? Is sadly common for many Christians to cultivate an attitude that they have attained. Without words, we never say it. Without words, we put forth an image of constant triumph that gives the false idea that we have already arrived, that we're already perfect. Or at least more perfect than the next person. As we talk about not wearing a mask and being authentic with one another. So start to wrap things up. Page 4, a 4-page message. We're going pretty quick though. All right. Last thing, no, 2 more things. Forgetting what is behind and pressing or straining toward what is ahead. He realized the past didn't matter, and his only option was to seek or pursue the more of the future. Forgetting what is behind. Pursuing. We need to be a people that pursue the future, knowing that there is more. I found this interesting story. I thought it was. When Spain led the world, about the 15th century, its coins reflected their national arrogance. They were inscribed with the phrase, nothing further, meaning that Spain was the ultimate in all the world. But after the discovery of the New World, they realized that it was not the end of the world. So they changed the inscription to more beyond. In the same way, some Christians say nothing further, and others say more beyond. When Spain didn't know about the New World, they thought they were it. They thought they were the ultimate. Then the New World gets discovered, and all of a sudden they realize that there is more, and they leaned into that more beyond. In the same way, we can kind of get complacent and be happy where we're at, or we can lean into the more beyond. This is where childlike faith meets maturity. Kids can't wait to grow up or be bigger, to be more mature, because when you get out of the house, you have more freedom. That's what kids want. Well, teenagers want. They want more freedom. But our freedom comes only from our maturity. People want to be mature so they can have freedom, but our freedom only comes from our maturity. So Paul says, I press on, press on, strain forward. Shows that he had put his hand to the plow and refused to look back. That's a reference to Luke chapter 9. You put your hand to the plow, you don't look back. We can let the past distract us, and here's the kicker: not just the bad things, but the good things as well. The past can drag us down, no doubt. People have things in the past that they have a hard time letting go of, unfortunately. But even the good things from the past can drag us down and be a distraction if we're always wishing things were like what they were. And it keeps us from what God has for us in the future. So again, forgetting what is behind, the good and the bad, obviously, and the good as well, if it's holding us from what God has for us. And the last phrase, their mind is set on earthly things, but our citizenship is in heaven. This goes back to the first phrase, rejoice always, because this is our temporary home. So Paul ends chapter 3 by reminding them, hey, you're just visiting this planet. You can rejoice because this is not the whole story. So what we're going to do, and I'll do it right here, is we're going to pray over these reflection phrases, that these things that we just talked about would become real in our life, that we rejoice in the Lord. Are you somebody who rejoices in what God has done, that he has a plan, that he is sovereign? Or are you limiting your gratefulness, your rejoicing, only to your circumstances when things are good? Can you rejoice as a discipline even when things are hard, when things are bad? Paul says he's writing them because this is a safeguard to you. It's protecting us. Paul is wanting to protect the Philippians from this lie that you have to earn God's favor with your behavior. Watch out for those dogs. Do you see the value, or do you see the reason why he used dogs? Because it was these dogs, these people were undermining God's grace. It is we who are the circumcision, that people who are truly in the faith are the ones who are not depending on their own effort, but only what Christ has done on the cross. So they put no confidence in the flesh. Are you putting some of your confidence in what you do? Paul warns us not to do that. Whatever were gains, I now consider loss. I consider them garbage. The good things that we do to earn God's favor, I say good things, the things we do to earn God's favor, do you really see how ineffective they are? Maybe not just worthless, but almost offensive. I want to know Christ. Do you want to know him or know more about him? A lot of people just want to know more about. But to know Christ, that's a different level. To know the power of his resurrection, not the power that was in it, but that came out of it. I want to know Christ, again, power of his resurrection. Not that I have already attained all this. Are you walking in some humility, recognizing that you still have a long way to go, and that's okay? Forgetting what is behind and pressing on to what is ahead, like we just talked about, even the good things, not just the bad. Their mind is set on earthly things, but our citizenship is in heaven. Again, do you see yourself as a citizen of heaven or a citizen of our country and our state? And the last one is a righteousness that comes from God on the basis of faith and faith alone. So hopefully some of these phrases might resonate with you. Again, thank you so much for joining us for this kind of quick, shortened up message. Take care. God bless.